You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Does this guy fit into the 2024 roster? Is this infield already set for next year? And the waiver wire strikes again for the Kansas City Royals. That's all coming up on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
First things first, we want to thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen every day. And as always, and as you should know by now, you can find us on those podcasting platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and you can always check us out on YouTube. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and comment on the page. Shoot me questions over on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. I was just out at Kauffman Stadium the other day, and you guessed it, I did use Gametime to buy those tickets, guys. It's so simple. It's so easy. It's the app you want to use when buying tickets, and it doesn't just have to be at baseball games. It can be at comedy shows. It can be at concerts. There is no stress. There's no hassle. It is the app to use when buying tickets. So as I mentioned, I was out at Kauffman Stadium. I was actually at Kauffman Stadium over the weekend. And I was there on Monday night when the team won in walk-off fashion, thrilling fashion, that is, against the red-hot Seattle Mariners. And I could sit here and dive into Bobby Witt Jr. and the pace that he's on right now, top 10 in all of baseball and F-WAR. I mean, you really are watching a superstar on your hands. Yes, I could talk about that. I really could. I could give you all the good numbers, the good stats. And don't worry, one of the episodes this week will be another deep dive into Bobby Witt Jr. But one of the guys I did want to dive into, and especially to open the show today, is a guy that is brand new to Kansas City. And a guy that maybe when he came over, the expectation wasn't that much. But from what I've seen, there might be a big leaguer in there. And that's Nelson Velasquez. Now, Nelson Velasquez came over in that Chicago Cubs trade that sent Jose Cuas to Chicago. And they get a 24, 25-year-old raw power bat and Nelson Velasquez, who really was just blocked in Chicago. There was no real future for him because their outfield was pretty much loaded. Yes, they liked the bat, they liked the power, but it just was a guy that was never going to find consistent at-bats. Now, the Royals, they looked at that and said, where's our lack of depth? Where do we need to get a lot better? You could argue it's in the outfield. Now, the one thing with Nelson Velasquez, which I liked about this trade, and we didn't really get a chance to dive into it too much on the week that he was acquired. But what I really liked about it is the Royals went with a different approach. They did not go with the speedy guy, the contact guy. They went with a guy that has immense power, a strikeout problem, but the immense power, I think, was worth it, especially when dealing with a guy like Jose Cuas, who hadn't been particularly good for you in Kansas City, and he sure as heck did not fit in the future bullpen for Kansas City. Not sure anybody right now in this bullpen does. But ever since Nelson Velasquez has come over to Kansas City, he's only just hit safely in all 3 games. He's homered twice. He homered on the first at bat when he had a Royals uniform on. And I got to thinking about his fit, what this team's going to need going into 2024. Because a lot of people could just go, well, this is just like the Edward Olivares trade. You know, when the Royals acquired Olivares from San Diego, it felt like that type of move. A guy that was blocked in San Diego, not a great glove, but you like the exit velocity off the bat, the barrel percentage. You've heard me talk about that a lot. We saw the same stuff in Nelson Velasquez. But I will tell you this. I think he is somebody, A, that's younger than Edward Olivares, which is why the Royals made the move to send Olivares down to AAA Omaha and keep Velasquez, because Velasquez, A, is younger, and B, the upside is far more than what Olivares could ever be. Olivares is a guy that was such a defensive liability, and we've said this with MJ Melendez before. When you're a big-time liability defensively, you have to make up for it at the plate. You really do. And even though Olivares could be a guy that could hit for more average, which some people pay attention to batting average, I really don't. I think I would take my chances with somebody who could run into 20 home runs next year. If he gets 140 games, assuming he stays healthy, assuming he stays in Kansas City, the power's there for a 20 home run guy, which I think would be a very nice piece for a guy that's rotating, somewhere in a corner outfield spot. Maybe he platoons with the Kyle Isbell, not in center field, and you put him in left or right, or you DH him. I think this is going to be one of those underrated moves because sometimes guys that are blocked in the way that Nelson Velasquez was, you hope they do one thing really, really well, at least at the plate. Or are they somebody that can make an impact on the bases? And we'll talk about a guy that the Royals got through the waiver wire that can make an impact on the bases. But does he do that? Is he great defensively? Or does he have raw power like Nelson Velasquez does? That's something to work with. And I'm glad the Royals are giving him a chance to close out this year. And no, not playing every single day, but getting him in there when it really fits the matchup. And for me, these are the type of guys how you can really mold them into something, I don't want to say special, but mold them into something that's worthwhile. I think that's a much better example in describing Nelson Velasquez. I'm not going to go on this podcast, I'm not going to go over the air and say, Nelson Velasquez is already the perfect fit in Kansas City. The Royals won the trade. Let's see what Chicago does. Let's see what Jose Cuas does to close out the season. But it's also why trading your relievers, not even when they're at their highest value, just trading relievers in general can work out in your favor. I mean, I've already discussed this with multiple people that want to see Nelson Velasquez on this team next year. It's only been 3 games. Why should we overreact to anything? I think it's more so of the type of player he is. The Royals don't have a lot of raw power guys. And I think we've already seen in that St. Louis series, even I was impressed the other night in that series opener against Seattle. No, he's hitting the ball hard to shortstop, and on his third at bat, right before he comes out of the game, he rips one to right field. Adjustments. Good adjustments. And he's young enough that you can work with him a little bit. Maybe he doesn't turn into anything. But those are the type of moves that maybe we didn't talk about enough at the trade deadline. We were worried about the return for Scott Barlow. We were worried about the return for Ryan Yarbrough. That Jose Cuas for Nelson Velasquez deal, I think, was really good for the Royals, more so than ever could be for Chicago. I mean, Jose Cuas, last time I checked, he hadn't given up a run, but he's been Jose Cuas when Jose Cuas was on his good stretch. Now, he's not giving up any runs, but he's walking a lot of guys. He's dealing with a lot of base runners. You get a guy that you can plug in as maybe a 4th outfielder next year. You have that raw power. It is something to work with. And I'm hoping it's the sign of things to come when the Royals are trying to acquire guys. You don't see this a lot from the Royals front office, going against a guy that was completely against their motto 5-6 years ago, that it was speed and defense. If we're going to acquire somebody, we want somebody that fits that mold. This was the complete opposite. This was somebody that doesn't have the best glove, has tremendous pop at the plate, but he's still somebody you've got to work with. He's very raw. Now, he's already done it at the big league level. He's come up to Kansas City. He's played in Chicago. He's homered at the big league level. He's had some good stretches. Overall, as a big leaguer, he has not amounted to much, but those are the players you take chances on. I don't want to see the Royals, go through another evaluation year next year because the clock's ticking on some of these guys. They may be young, but Bobby Witt Jr. wants to play for a team that's competitive. Michael Massey does. Vinny Pasquantino does. Maikel Garcia does. And I think the big question is for some of these guys that you're trying out, Kyle Isbell, Velasquez, Waters, are they really future fits? Do they deserve another chance next year? That's going to be the big question. I mean, of the 11 hits that Nelson Velasquez has this year, 5 of them are home runs. That, to me, is worth taking a shot on, even if he is a platoon bat. I'd rather have some thunder off the bench than somebody like Matt Duffy or Matt Beatty. Like, those are the type of guys I think you want to keep around. And we'll have to see. We'll have to wait and see how this closes out. But to me, he is an intriguing prospect, if you will. And I'm not meaning prospect like a 21 or 22-year-old. He needs some work, like Drew Waters needed some work, like Nick Prado needed work, like Melendez needed work. And if you can tap into that potential, get him to being a 15, 20 home run guy, that's not a bad 4th outfielder. That's some power off the bench that you could need next year. So the early returns for me, I think they're very positive. I haven't seen him do too much in the field yet, but at the plate, hit safely in all 3 games. He's homered in 2 of them. He's hit the ball hard in almost every single at bat when he's put the ball in play. I like what I've seen, and I am hoping to see him in 2024. All right, we're going to take our first break. When we come back here, we want to talk about this infield a little bit. We've been discussing 2024, and I think we need to really hammer in some of the guys that are going to be there, and more specifically, who's going to be in this infield. That's coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we discuss this infield and why I think it's already a lock for 2024, let's give a shout out to today's title sponsor in Gametime. I already told you to open up the show. I was at the K on Saturday. I was at the K the other night. Both times I used the Gametime app, and I went with a big group of people on Saturday, smaller group of people the other night, but it's just the app you have to use regardless of the size of the crowd you're going with, because it's so easy, it's so simple to use, and it's not just for baseball games. It can be for concerts, it can be for comedy shows, it can be for football games, it can be for basketball games. It just is so simple to use, and I know there are a lot of apps out there that give you the opportunity to buy tickets from them. Don't worry about the hassle over there. Just use Gametime and do so the next time you go to a game, next time you go to an event, just use Gametime. So here's what you need to do after you're done watching the podcast. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Who wouldn't love something like that? $20 off on your first purchase. You can do that with Gametime. Now, the terms apply. So again, go and create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're kind of at this point in the season where you want to see who fits. You're coming up on the evaluation year. It's almost the tail end of the season, and the report cards are going to be coming back. And those report cards are not only vitally important for Matt Quatrero, not only important for JJ Piccolo. I mean, some guys' careers are on the line. When you are what the Royals are, which is 39-81 right now, when you have that record, a lot of these guys are getting chances that they just simply wouldn't, even for teams that were 500. You know, you have guys like a Dairon Blanco, the hero of last night, a fantastic story, a 30-year-old rookie, almost hit for the cycle earlier this year. Incredibly fast. He seems to be the safety squeeze and the suicide squeeze king. And he's the guy that you may want there in a situation like that. I'm surprised that Seattle and apparently nobody else in baseball knows it's coming when there's a runner at third, but he's a great story. At the same time, with the Royals' timeline of contention, a competitive window, does a 30-year-old rookie fit into that? And that's why these report cards are so vitally important. If it's a failing grade, if it's not a passing grade, the Royals are going to move on. I've tried to say this point over and over and over again. You know, when the Royals go into this offseason, it's not going to be some fluff that you'll hear. It's not going to be these moves that we're all accustomed to seeing. The Royals are going to make some splashes. This is my gut feeling. This is just the vibe I've been getting from this front office when they've spoken to the media, because they know how important it is to spend. Now, how do they use their money? Does it go into free agents? Does it go into long-term extension for Bobby Witt Jr.? Both, for me, I think would be good. But back to the point, if you are going to try to make a splash, well, then some guys are being evaluated for their job security. Okay, I think a perfect example is, a Daniel Lynch or a Chris Bubich, a Brad Keller. Those guys had evaluation years. If they didn't pass, they were not going to be on the team next year. They were not going to have that spot in the rotation next year. Zach Greinke, you don't need to worry about him. He's going to be a free agent. Jordan Lyles, I'd imagine he's not going to be in this rotation next year. Kyle Isbell, evaluation year. I don't think guys like Bobby Witt Jr., Michael Garcia, Melendez, Vinny Pasquantino, Michael Massey, it wasn't a do or die evaluation year. It was more so to get a gauge as to where they're at. Some of these other guys, they've had chances before. Brady Singer was one of those guys. And before he went on this tear over his last 15, 16 starts or so. He was one of those guys that was looking like he wasn't going to be back, or maybe the Royals try to move him or move him to the bullpen. Hell if I know. But what I have loved in this evaluation process is as this season has progressed, more so in the second half, I think I've started to see a core. We had a very long podcast episode, maybe not very long. I mean, they're always 30 minutes. I think that we are starting to see why a core is so important and why Bobby Witt Jr. emerging in the way that he has and Michael Garcia doing the same. It's giving a clearer picture going into this offseason. And I'm going to go as far to say right now, there are 4 to 5 locks on this team. Absolute locks going into 2024. Garcia's not going anywhere. He'll be at third base. Bobby Witt Jr. is the guy they're building around. I mean, he's no longer just the best player on the Royals. He's one of the best players in baseball. Like I said to begin the podcast, top 10 in F-WAR. I mean, he's up in the elite category right now. And people are starting to notice. You build around that. Michael Massey's numbers, I get it. They're not jaw-dropping. In fact, if you just look at the triple slash, if you look at the WRC+, you're not going to be impressed. But he's great defensively over there, and he's been really good after a dismal April. He's constantly improved, and I want that at second base. Second base is not a premium position. It's really not. And to me, it's one of those spots where if you can just get a little bit offensively, you're doing stuff right. I mean, go back in the last 10 years. Name some second basemen that you just know are the best player on their team or a top 3 player on their team. I mean, you have the Jose Altuves out there. In the past, you had the Chase Utleys. But, for a lot of the really good teams, especially in the American League Central, they're not overly concerned with a second baseman. You get enough from that position, you feel pretty good. I always think back to those White Sox teams that were just terrorizing with that lineup. And guys like Gavin Sheets were hitting 8th in the lineup. You know who their second baseman was? Well, at one point it was Josh Harrison. At one point it was Cesar Hernandez. It was a team that knew the spots that had premium value, and they put star players there. Second base, you just need enough. The Royals in 13 and 14, their second baseman was Omar Infante. Of course, they get Ben Zobrist in the World Series run, but for a large part of that run, 13, 14, 15, it was Omar Infante. There's more premium positions you need to fill. And then first base, it's Vinny Pasquantino, who might be the best pure hitter of anybody. Now, maybe I shouldn't be saying that any longer because Bobby Witt Jr. is showing he's a superstar. But my Lord, 3 of those 4 guys, they are above average hitters. Michael Garcia is a perfect leadoff hitter. Bobby Witt Jr., best hitter on your team. You could maybe bump him down to 3 because that's where I think you put your best hitter. But I'm fine with him at 2. He's been very comfortable in the 2 spot. Vinny Pasquantino coming back fully healthy from surgery. Yeah, I like him in the 3 spot. You keep Salvador Perez, he's at the 4. You don't keep Salvador Perez, Freddie Fermin's in that lineup. That infield is set to me. I'm not touching that infield. That infield feels like an incredibly fun infield. And think about it. Bobby Witt Jr. now is not the let's hope and pray he's really good. No, he's a superstar. He's an absolute superstar. Vinny Pasquantino, going into 2023, I thought he was the Royals' best player. He comes back. I'm not worried in the slightest about how he looks coming off injury. I think he's going to be really good. Michael Garcia, I think when you look at a guy of his stature, you want him to add a little bit more muscle because now he's playing third base. Not enough where it completely immobilizes him, but you run into maybe 5 to 10 more home runs for him next year. Folks, you're looking at a great infield, and you may be looking at the best defensive infield in all of baseball. Maybe that doesn't mean much to you. It does to me. It does to me when you're trying to build. And then you have some pieces like a Kyle Isbell. Listen, he's not the sexy pick, but Royals Farm Reports pointed this out before. He's a guy that in the last 2 months, above average hitter, really good defense. Maybe he's not your center fielder. That's fine. And I'm not putting him as a lock. But there's just more pieces now. And I promise I'm not falling for they're much better in the second half. They are. But I think we're starting to see in a long season that sometimes guys just need time. And I still think this team would be far better than where they're at if they never lost Vinny Pasquantino. those hot streaks, those hot stretches, I mean, could you imagine having that bat in the middle of your lineup? I'm not going on here and saying this team's going to be completely better. There's still a lot of moves that need to be made. This could be the 15th best offense in baseball, but if you do nothing for that pitching staff, they're going to lose 100 games. I mean, that's how bad the pitching staff is right now. There's two guys I would keep. Cole Reagans, Brady Singer. That's it for me. But the infield, at least, that's set. I would be floored if they make any moves to add to that infield. That infield is completely set to me. They have passed this evaluation process. Bobby Witt Jr., A+. Michael Garcia, A. Vinny Pasquantino, it's unfortunate that he got hurt and he really slumped before he was shelved for the entire year, but he was trending to have a passing grade. Michael Massey, put him in like a C+. We all know D is passing and maybe the bar's too low there, but it's set for me. You get great defense at second base and you improve the way he's been improving, I'm not moving off that. I don't have anybody pounding at the door to be the second baseman. And you go tell me what free agent second baseman you would want. Now, if you have a great option, comment on the YouTube page. I never mind having a little back and forth and never mind having somebody disagree with me. If you think there's a much better fit, I'd love to hear. Or just shoot the question over to me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Love the middle infield, man. Love the corners. And once Vinny Pasquantino's back, I like the way that lineup can look a little bit more. Still some pieces to be added. I don't think Melendez is going to be going anywhere. Still kind of have the jury out on Drew Waters and Kyle Isbell. I'd imagine they're going to add a corner outfield bat. Just have a gut feeling. And I'd imagine they're going to add a couple of pieces of their rotation and then go all over the waiver wire and trades for a bullpen because there might need to be 8 new bullpen guys next year. Okay, we're not finished just yet. I do want to discuss the waiver wire and what the Royals have done in the second half. I never want to say I told you so, but I did kind of predict that after the deadline, the Royals were going to be active, which they have. We're going to talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can check us out on all those podcasting platforms. You know them by now: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. And you can always have some fun with us on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. I love the comments I get there. I love the questions you guys have been asking me on Twitter. Like I've said multiple times before, this is no fun without any interaction. I mean, you look at this team, they're 39-81. I'm having a blast doing these podcast episodes almost every single day. Now, little bit of a programming note, looking ahead later on in the week. I am going to have another show coming up tonight because I didn't have one on Monday, had some internet problems that kind of forced me to push things back a little bit. But I'm still going to give you those 2 episodes in the first 2 days. So this episode, right after this, I'm going to have another one uploaded, hopefully, after the game tonight against the Seattle Mariners. Feel pretty confident in that and getting that up in a timely manner. Then I'm going to have an episode on Wednesday. I'm going to have an episode on Thursday. I will be out of town over the weekend, so no show on Friday, but I'm still going to do a Mailbag Friday, so you can always shoot me your questions. I am going to answer them immediately on Twitter. You're not going to have to wait. You want to just make them public? Just tag me in a tweet. You want to be a little bit more private and not have your account shown? My DMs are open. You can ask me anything you want. Just keep it PG. Actually, now that I think about it, it doesn't always have to be PG because we're not going to have an episode on Friday. So as long as you don't hurt my reputation by anything like that, I am more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. But let's talk about this waiver wire, what the Royals have done. And I've honestly liked a lot of the talent they've added from Texas's system. I am a little bit shocked that Joe Barlow has not made his way to Kansas City. I am shocked that with the way the bullpen has looked, a guy with closing experience has not been called up to Kansas City. But maybe that's not my place. Maybe they're waiting to call him up in September. I believe he's on the 40-man roster, so there's really no holdup there. I just feel like this bullpen could even be more aggressive than they've been. They've added Tucker Davidson from the waiver wire, and he's a guy that, hasn't been the best, but you like a certain pitch, you work with it. So you have Joe Barlow, you have Tucker Davidson, and then they made a move a couple days back in claiming Bubba Thompson off waivers, a former top 5 prospect in Texas's system. He was the number 5 prospect in 2018, 2019, also a former top 100. kind of like a Nelson Velasquez, where when he was in the big leagues, there wasn't much to really be prideful about in your numbers. Nelson Velasquez had some big time moments. Bubba Thompson has 80 grade speed. He's incredibly fast, incredibly athletic, not the best defender despite all that. So really he can only impact the game for you. I feel like with his legs right now, you get him with a full off season of work, different story. But folks, I'm going to continue to pound the table with this. This is how you finish out your evaluation year. You continue to load it up with failed talent from other places. I've always said this with contending teams and for bottom feeders, right? The Royals at 39 and 81 are bottom feeders. So what do you do as a bottom feeder? You pick up the scraps. It sounds very, disappointing. It sounds boring to hear, but bottom feeders can then get up to the top when they pick up the scraps from roster crunches. Roster crunches are prime preying opportunities for bottom feeders. Now, Bubba Thompson was a top prospect, as I said, for Texas. And no, he never really shined for the Rangers, even when he was in the big leagues. But Texas is so good now, they spent so much money that, yes, you do start picking up, some of those players that are falling through the cracks. They've added major league talent. You can't keep everybody in the 40-man roster. So the Royals can go under the radar a little bit and pick up some of these guys. Now, Tucker Davidson is not an electrifying arm, but it's a guy that you take a chance on, you take a flyer on. Waiver wires are the ways to success for bad teams. It's what Tampa did for a long time. Now, you need the right coaches, you need the right voices, you need the right player development, but it can work because they're so cheap. And man, I feel like a broken record saying this. For a waiver wire deal, I always ask this, what's the harm? What's the harm for a waiver wire player? Okay, let's go worst case scenario. Well, when you're 39 and 81 and you have a waiver wire pickup and he's on the big league team, let's say he's bad. How does that drastically impact your season, which has already been bad? That's why I get questions on Twitter of why would they pick up that guy? He's terrible, terrible numbers. Well, unless you are a full-on defender of guys in the bullpen or guys that are off the bench, you give me a downside to this. The upside is you find a guy that usually has a couple more years of control and you can tap into something there. There's talented guys out there. Just because big league numbers don't look good doesn't mean you can't fix them. Baltimore looked at Ryan O'Hearn and said, we like some of the advanced numbers. We can make a tweak here or there. We know what Ryan O'Hearn's looked like this year. Those are the type of players you can take chances on. And no, I'm not saying the Royals should try to find Ryan O'Hearn's out there, but if you turn certain guys into what Ryan O'Hearn's doing, it shows how good your player development can be. Will Bubba Thompson, will Tucker Davidson be the poster children for that? No, I don't think they will. But it's good they're taking chances on it, and it ties it back in perfectly to our first segment today. With Nelson Velasquez, no, he's not going to come in and immediately, lock up a spot. He's not going to go take at-bats from somebody who's been here all season long. But you see one little thing of upside, and you try to work with it. I am all on board with it. They've been very aggressive. I said that after the trade deadline, they were going to be more aggressive. They have been, but I would say even going to September, try to be even more aggressive. Guys like Joe Barlow, a closer on a bad team last year, not overall terrible numbers at all. You take him and maybe you just stash him away in AAA till the year's up, you bring him up, and then next year you have a guy that can fight for a bullpen spot. It's all about trying things out like that, and it's important that the Royals do so. Waiver wires are the way to success for bad teams that don't want to spend when they are losing. But as I said, in the offseason, I do imagine they spend, but that does not mean you still can't be aggressive on the waiver wire. That is going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. I always welcome your questions. I welcome your follow. I welcome your input, because I don't do what I do. I can't do what I do without you, the followers. Now, for the programming note, do not worry, because we got another episode coming out later on tonight after the game. So be sure to check it out there. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.